where you are. Oh, Argentina, Glasgow, perfect. Well, I'm going to say good day, as I'm not quite sure where everybody is, but happy Friday, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on today's session. It's great to see so many of you here from our network and beyond, all giving your time to understand how to better attract and retain neurodiverse talent. So my name is Lauren Roberts, and I'm the advocacy lead for the City and Guilds Foundation, where we are all about removing barriers for individuals and allowing them to find secure and sustained employment, no matter if their background, any barriers they may have faced. Earlier this year, we made a commitment to raise awareness to the barriers that neurodiverse individuals face in their workplace and how to empower employers to make informed decisions and adjustments for all members of staff. We recently published a Neurodiversity Index in partnership with Do It Solutions, which is actually going to be the first session that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to let Professor Amanda Kirby talk to you about that in a moment. But just a little bit of housekeeping from me. We'd have a panel of amazing speakers who have experience working in these spaces, and I'm keen to hand over to them. But just before we get started, we do have an active chat, which is amazing already. So please feel free to keep populating that. We do have a Q&A box as well, and we do have some time at the end for a Q&A. So if any questions do arise, please just put them in there and we'll make sure we get to them. And if we don't have time to get to them, we'll make sure that we take them offline and we get an answer back to you in any kind of follow-up email that you receive. So I'm going to kick off with just having our panel introduce themselves before we get started. So if I can hand over to you, Amanda, just to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, and good morning, good afternoon and good evening to people all around the world, which is wonderful. I'm Professor Amanda Kirby. I'm the CEO of Do It Solutions and work in the field of neurodiversity for the last 30 years, and was very honoured to be part of the City and Guilds to bring the Neurodiversity Index to you, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment.
And can I bring you in, Rob?
Yeah, hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Robert. So I look after apprenticeships and technical education for a large pharmaceutical research company. And we're really lucky to be heavily involved in apprenticeships and changing the way we bring people into our industry, moving from a traditional kind of industry more to a fully inclusive industry. And we're able to take part in such good activities such as this, as because we've took part in like the Princess Royal Training Awards and we're successful in gaining those. So we're able to translate some of the things that we've done into then giving you kind of insight on what we do moving forwards.
Well, it's great to have one of our PRTA alumni here, so thank you very much. And then last but not least, Charmain, if I can bring you in just for a quick intro.
I'm Charmain Bucho and I'm head of DEI here at City and Guilds, and I'm also one of our internal coaches and co-founder of Alternative Coaching, which provides coaching services for adults, families, caregivers and organisations.
Thank you so much, Charmain. Right, I'm going to jump straight in. So I'm going to hand over back to Amanda, who's going to kick us off by diving into the Neurodiversity Index that I previously mentioned. So over to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much. And let me just get the slides up, which is always the hardest thing. Okay. Can you see my Can you see my slides?
Yep, we can.
Oh, right, I'm happy. Okay, so we're really excited to do the Neurodiversity Index as a benchmark to try to understand about employers' perspectives and also employees' perspectives of what it's like to be neurodivergent and what it's like to try to create neuro-inclusive spaces. So in a very short period of time this morning, I'm going to take you through some of the key findings that we found from the index. What do we know about neurodiversity in the workplace? Why is this index important? What are some key themes I'm going to run through, and how can employers engage? I think we'll have a broader conversation this morning with my colleagues around the table. So what do we know about neurodiversity in the workplace? Well, till we did this, and this is why this piece of work is so important, we didn't know a great deal, or what we did, we knew it in sort of segments. So we knew sometimes people's experience who had autism or who had ADHD or had dyslexia in separate sort of silos, but not understanding that overlap is the rule rather than the exception, that most people don't come in neat boxes, and the diagnosis they get may be related to the people they've seen and the places they've gone to. So it's very important, first of all, is to understand employers' perceptions about what they thought neurodiversity was about, but also what they were doing practically in their workplaces to become neuro-inclusive employers. So that was really important. And then we wanted to listen to the voices of employees and their experiences of what that was like to be in the workplace at the moment, and to look at those two perspectives. The report's out, and please go and download it and have a review with it. But I'm going to give you some feedback, some of it is in the report and a little bit more as well. And I'm going to go through some of those key themes for you. And it was important because it was a large data set. This was very important. Large data set of employers and a large data set of all age employees as well, and a good gender mix as well. So what do we know, first of all, is around 20% of people are likely to be neurodivergent in your workplaces and spaces. And that's, you know, that's everywhere. And neurodiversity is the different way we think, process, move, act, and communicate. So we're all neurodiverse, but some of us like diverge away from the construct of how we do things or how society does things typically. That might vary from place to place. And because we shape the way in the workplace we do things for a particular group of people who think, process, communicate in a certain sort of way, some people are excluded. And what we're trying to find out is why, and what can we do in the workplace to really think about inclusion in the most, so we're not losing talent and we're maintaining the talent we've got there as well. Now, where you get that spiky profile of what you want is the perfect fit, which is I've got great skills and the skills and the job fit together. And that's really what this is all about. This is trying to attract the right people in the right jobs and getting them in there. And if we don't do that, and we have barriers to recruitment and retention, we don't know who we've turned away. We don't know what talent we've lost on the way. So this is the report, and you can download the report, which has got key elements of our findings. But what I'm going to do is go through a few of these really in a little bit more detail with you and talk through it. So one of the things which was really good, we had a wide range of sizes of organisations responding. So this is really what we found from the sample that we had was really representative of large-scale organisations, but also small and medium organisations as well. I'm going to start off just discussing with you the employers, and then I'm going to talk to you about the employees. So 40% had not had training of their senior leaders in the areas of neurodiversity. And I think that's really important because it says we've got a way to go, you know, and I think all of this is where we are now, you know, and this is a benchmark. We've never had this data in this sort of way before. So that's why this is such an important piece of work. So 40% no, and we've also got another 31% we're not sure. So a lot of this is where you don't know, but there's quite a lot of I'm not sures as well. And when you're thinking about if we want to get investment and buy-in, we need that from our senior leadership. So we're seeing that that's an area that we need to start there to talk about neurodiversity to make sure that it's important for every organisation. The same sort of thing we're seeing as well was in the HR professionals. And if you're thinking about your recruitment, retention processes, then HR is crucial because we really need to be thinking about job descriptions, interview processes, onboarding, that whole employment cycle. And again, going down to managers, 45% had not had training in the last 12 months and another 26% were not sure. So we've got a way to go. I think that's the bottom line here. That reviewing job descriptions, sometimes the language we use in a job description can be misleading and may put off people applying for a job. We use terms like flexible, what does that mean to somebody? Or multitasking, does that mean you need to juggle? And it may put off people and applicants. So we can see there is a way to go in terms of looking at job descriptions. And the other thing is that we have positively, 35% said they are offering alternative application processes. So I think this is a good start, but we've got a way to go there. Have you adapted recruitment processes to accommodate 41%? So this is positive. So you can see there is some movement around making processes more neuro-inclusive. When people are not generally using specialist recruitment programs, and it may well be that they're not sure where to signpost people. So there's an education piece here as well. In your organisation, are there neurodiversity champions? We've seen this from mental health first aiders in some companies in the UK, US, globally, where they're getting champions in. We run a champions programme, but I wondered whether that we're not seeing that, but I think 48% says there is a movement. So I don't think it's all bleak. I think actually this says we're in a rising tide where there's increasing awareness, but we need to start at the top and make sure we've got training at all the different levels. And again, that linked with specialist recruitment. Oops, I need to go backwards. This is a hard one, and I think it's important just to point out that collecting data about your neurodivergent employees, I'm not sure what data you're going to collect, and I think it's one that maybe we can discuss later on, because not everybody can get a diagnosis of a condition like ADHD or autism or dyspraxia or dyslexia or dyscalculia. And in many places in the world, and certainly in the UK, we have got long waiting lists. So when you're asking a question about if somebody's neurodivergent, asking it in a way that's meaningful so your data has some meaning might be quite challenging, especially if people have overlap with all of those conditions. They may not fall into one neat box. So this is a reflective piece really, which is what do we need to collect in terms of data? It's different when we're collecting somebody about somebody's age. There's a definable. This is not quite so simple. When we asked about the commitment, we've got 34% saying that it's very important than neurodiversity inclusion. We've got 26% somewhat and 16% not important. So we've got an education piece, certainly, and it may well be about seeing that why. So if you haven't got that senior leadership buy-in, you may find why is it important might be something that we need to really discuss much more. What's in it for me? What's in it for me at senior leadership in an organization, for the managers, for individuals and for HR. I think people really wanting some resources, but some people clearly are not saying that that's important at all. Resources like toolkits and guidance for managers so they feel that they are informed. And then we've got the disability inclusion policies and procedures. And this says we're starting off this was the first year, but you can just start in planning, not currently. We've got a little way to go, but 1/3 clearly have got some of those things in place. And we've got full implementation, only 15%. So you can see this early trend. I'm going through this pretty quickly because I want to cover most of it at all, but just to give you those trends of where we are. In the last year, so anyone in your leadership position or board said or shared they were neurodivergent. And I think this goes back to our senior leadership, that if we've got that voice at the top that says, yes, this is my experience, I'm sharing this with you, also opens the door and says to other people in this organization, it's a safe place to have these conversations. Now, I think this is interesting. This is, are you confident of someone who tells you they're neurodivergent? And the Institute of Leadership and Management in the UK published a report in 2020. And at that time, only 6 out of 10 employers would employ somebody with ADHD. Now, what we've seen, because we've got a rise in awareness of ADHD over the last 2 or 3 years, that ADHD is coming in line with dyslexia and autism in terms of people's confidence to have these conversations. But there's a gap between some of the other conditions where actually, like developmental language disorder, which is 4 or 5 times more common than autism, people would still feel very anxious about that. So let me flip to the employees. This covered a wide span, and one of the key features we found was females, particularly who had children who were neurodivergent as well, and trying to be sandwich generation. This group, particularly here, we had quite a high response who were managing above, managing below in their family, and also managing themselves. And this was really important finding, that the impact of disability on work and home life, that we were seeing that most days for some people in those 37% and some days for others, so more than half, it was having an impact on their day-to-day functioning. Now we got that spread again. The whole survey was really quite balanced in terms of age, gender, the time that people had been in different jobs as well. And they also working in different settings, from full-time, all at home, and also in the workplace as well. Now, the sort of neurodivergent traits or diagnoses that people were presenting with was ADHD, interestingly, was the most common one that people had responded to, felt very strong about that. And I think this is sort of mirroring awareness as well in the employers, was the top 3 were ADHD, autism and dyslexia. And it may mirror the fact that it's easier, in inverted commas, to get some of these diagnoses than some of the ones further below. And that might represent why some people weren't coming forward and participating. Now, this is important. This is the experience of disclosing a neurodivergent condition in the workplace. And I think this is telling a story that 1/3 had responded, just under 1/3 said they responded with a good response. I think that is positive, because that says there is, when there's training, when there's support, when there's understanding, sharing that you're neurodivergent can be good to do. You've got quite a proportion that says that they haven't done so. And there may be a variety of reasons for that, which we can explore further, whether that they've only recently had a diagnosis or in another position, they've had a bad response when they shared and disclosed. But we have got 10% with a poor response and 26% with an okay response. So I think this is one we need to see, because it's a measure of confidence in the workplaces and spaces they're in. Now, what are the greatest challenges in the workplace? Well, these are very important because they're things that we can focus on. The interviews, we can make those more inclusive. The application process, we don't know who hasn't been applied for a job that's been turned off by the job description, or maybe the online application process or the way that it's being done. But even up front, even when we're doing education into employment, things like creating a CV and knowing how to search for jobs, we also know that a lot of people who are neurodivergent may not have the networks that other people have that can utilize that to find jobs. So these are things that we can really think about. So some very practical things, and we've seen that psychometric assessments may be biased for people who are neurodivergent and actually exclude people unnecessarily. So I think this is a really important slide to hold on to. Greatest challenge is sustaining work-life balance. And I think that was represented by a large number of people who were parents of children, with children who are neurodivergent and also neurodivergent themselves. The time taken to receive adjustments under the Equality Act 2010 in the UK, I know we've got a global audience here, we do need to get those adjustments in place in a reasonable time. And the problem is, if we have a long delay, that can affect performance, it can affect relationships, and it can mean people drop out. And I think this is really, you've got nearly a third who haven't asked for any adjustments. They may not need them, but quite a proportion are still waiting even after a long period of time. So this could do better, I think. And the percentage satisfaction when they're getting them is reasonable, but some of them not. And I think that delay maybe has an impact. Last couple of slides, and I'm going to hand back to Lauren, is the satisfaction in supporting and onboarding. And this goes back to the HR managers being trained, the managers being trained to make sure we've got really good onboarding processes. It's that first stage when you arrive in a new job where you need to understand, what do I really need to do? What are the expectations of me socially? How am I going to engage with other people? And making sure my communication style doesn't clash with others, and to understand that. So this is going to be really important. And I think that no guidance or support provided says could do better. And that leads into what will make people thrive. And that is communication, attitudes, and coaching. And these are things I think we're going to be picking up on this morning in the rest of the webinar. Last couple of things, really. What support have you had to aid your progress? Not a lot, but this is where those regular reviews and check-ins, and that was a theme that came out, makes a lot of difference. And that work-home balance, being able to have some flexibility, understanding where to work and when to work, and a lack of support and opportunity means that maybe some individuals are not being able to progress as much. And a reticence about disclosure and concern about that may be something we need to face. Any training and relationship for those individuals? No. So we need to be thinking about our peers, our allies in the workplace as well, and knowing where to go for support, making sure that's clear. And last couple of things, do you have any family members? Yes, a lot of them, because neurodivergent traits have got a high genetic predisposition. I come from a very neurodivergent family with children and grandchildren. Everybody's neurodivergent in my family. So that wasn't a surprise, but it really did represent that for those individuals, we do need to remember their carers as well, that impact might have an impact on their day-to-day functioning, and be aware of that if we're employers as well. And I think that's what I'm coming to the end. So I've covered quite a lot in a short space of time. I hope that I've kept to time for you as well.
You have. Amazing. Thank you so much, Amanda. Somebody's just asked about the slides. So we will share the recording, everything after, for everyone. But that was great, and I love the bit around the I didn't love the bit around, but it was so good to see some of those stark barriers and just the percentages. I mean, it's so timely with what we're talking about, and also the bit around what individuals need to thrive. I think was really lovely. We're always about these webinars being as solution based as we can. We know what some of the stats say, but how do we make change? How do we make meaningful, sustained change? So with that, I'm going to bring Rob in now from the employer perspective. Rob, I wondered if you could talk to us from your perspective around why was implementing these inclusive practices important to you at Labcorb? Why is it important to make these practices, you know, universal and available to everyone in the workplace? And have you got any good examples of good practice in this space from your work?
There you go. I'm on mute. I'm off mute now there. So that's brilliant. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear Professor Amanda as well talk about it. So one thing I would say is when we're discussing anything around this kind of like topics and the connected topics, it's really important, especially from an employer perspective, to have that buy-in from the really high level in the company. So very early on, when we made a strategic decision that we wanted to progress inclusivity in all its forms, we approached our stakeholders and our board and our CEO and got that buy-in straight from the top, and each of our processes that we'll go through shortly, and I'll explain what we've done, we have kind of like a senior executive sponsor, so therefore we've got that buy-in straight from the top, so we can really come down. And what we often sometimes see is like where people are resistant to change because they see change coming in and change for change's sake, whereas what we want to do is change the culture of the company moving forwards. So one of the things we did, as I say, is we tried to make a strategy where it's not just a change for neurodiversity or a change for inclusivity, it's a change for all of the connective parts. Because what we often find is that some individuals that may come in because they've got barriers to entering employment may be neurodivergent, but then also have another kind of like concern or barrier which is stopping them entering the workplace. So we have to feed these elements all the way through our kind of like processes. I did send some slides over, so I'm not sure if we've got those to just put up on screen. If you just flick through to the next one for me, please. So this is kind of like the actions and small steps that we've taken as a company moving forward. And this is just a selection of some of the things, and they handily feed quite nicely into what Professor Amanda was talking about. Excuse me. So yeah, one of the main things there is we noticed how we attract people into the company and how we're trying to create the company. And I'm going to split this down into how we're attracting people in, how we're making it an environment for people want to stay with us, and then how we encourage more people to be more open internally in the company. So attracting more people in, we looked at a lot of our adverts, and it's about making sure that the language is plain, making sure that it's easily identifiable and readable. That's both only to the people that are coming into the business, but then also anybody that is supporting them to try and find education. What we try to do is get rid of all the kind of like jargon and make it very clear what's happening, including things like what shifts people might be working, what hours, what days they'll be in place. Is it home based? Is it at work? Are they going to be parts of teams? Are they going to be working individually? That way we can really help people understand that kind of like what the job is, so that we don't try and just drag people in and then they don't fit into the job, or they want to leave, or they have a bad experience. It's about making that. And then that leads into our flexible recruitment process, where we've switched our recruitment into making sure that we can, if people request a virtual interview, they can have a virtual interview. We can remove things like group interviews for people that don't flourish in those environments out of there. We can also flex the kind of the time of day of interview. So some people may find it easier to have interviews later in the day or early in the day. And that also goes along for lines such as if people have dependents that they're helping support, or if they are being supported in their application and that person's only available, say, in the evening, we can change our recruitment so that we can have that in the evening. Also taking out elements that aren't needed, so removing qualifications that were just there because they're historic qualifications that some people may have struggled to pass an exam but are perfectly capable of doing the job, and also removing things like the psychometric testing where it's not relevant or needed. This goes along lines of removing different elements that aren't needed for jobs, such as like what background checks need to be done at certain stages that needed for the job, what jobs can be carved so that we can make it so that it's a specific part of a bigger job that a couple of individuals might be able to do. As what we do is find some people have particularly unique skills in one particular area of a job but may not be capable of doing in the entire job for one reason or another, so we're very open to taking that apart. What that then goes into is then how we, what the programs we run to try and get people to stay in the business. So when we work with our training providers, for example, what we do is make sure that as part of our tender process, they have to also have support processes in place, because it's not ideal if we're trying to get people in and then we're putting them on development programs, for example, and then there isn't the training there, or it's kind of lackluster. So what we're trying to do is try and pass on our best behavior and good practices to those training providers and encourage them. So we're working with those people all the way through, and that expands out into how we're trying to influence the entire industry. So we're heavily involved in apprenticeship trailblazers. So we get companies like MenCap, for example, into the company trailblazers at the occupational standard level to help us understand the wording and language inside those. We run programs such as supported internships, which is basically a year-long program where an individual can come for us kind of like on a day a week and 4 days a week at a charity that we work with. And then over the course of that year, they can progress through to being with us full time and then progress into a job role with us, usually on an apprenticeship or with one of our supporting like supply chain companies. This allows us to have that kind of year-long building that relationship with them, get them comfortable, get managers comfortable with them. The added benefit we've had as a business is managers who may usually have just gone, oh no, this person isn't right for our job, over a year sees how great they are in that job role and how that job role can really support them, and it actually educates our line managers as well, so therefore they can progress in that, and we've had some great success on that. We do offer like work experience programs. Traditionally that used to be a kind of like a program where people would come in and they'd do a week's worth of work experience, and it was very narrow and we couldn't really cover many people. We've changed to a work experience program that can be accessed online. So this year we had 120 people. Our last week's work experience is designed to be able to be accessible by people from pupil referral units, or if they're in incarceration, if they're in a secure hospital, or if they just don't want to leave their house, or if they're in a school environment where they need more support. Everyone can access that, and what we found is over the course of that week where they access different lessons online, we can give out certificates at the end of it, which really encourages them to kind of like, even if they don't come to us, they've had that experience, whereas before they might not have got that, and we take that feedback on board every year so that we can alter and change that. Inside the company itself, we've got things called employee resource groups, and these are groups of individuals that come together, usually with a defined topic that they want to really support. So we have, for example, a pride group, and we have an enable group, which is all around physical disability, and then we have a neurodivergent group. These groups are both there to help support individuals across the entire business by being a point of call where they can go to. Sometimes you may end up with an area of a business where you might have only one individual that may be a neurodivergent individual. This provides them a framework where they can go to and talk to those individual people. What we've got is I've just noticed in chat it's popped up about people coming up later in their life. So what we've found is, as we've brought in a lot more of these programs and kind of like adaptive ways of working, we have seen people who have kind of self-identified or have been medically identified with different conditions later in life, and the employee resource groups are really valuable for them because it's people that are actively they can go to and get that support from them. And what we try and do is remove the kind of like the stigma away from all of that, and that's what we're trying to do, trying to be this inclusive environment. And what we have is an alumni group, so anybody who's been through any of our programs who is going forward in their career, they form this alumni group and then can talk to people both outside the company as ambassadors or coming into the company. And this forms what we call the my career, our story, because what we see this inclusivity and neurodiversity in the workplace is about, it's our story as a business, and that's what it's doing. It's about making people feel part of what we're doing and bringing people in. So these are all kind of like very minor changes, but it's about, if you concentrate as a business on that, how do you change your recruitment processes in terms of advertising, where you advertise, how you carry out advertisement, to bring people into roles that you've changed in terms of, are the roles suitable, have you adapted them, what are the programs like, and then the environment to keep people there, such as how inclusive do you make it. And if you split it down to those 3 columns, I think we've seen huge success. And one of the ones I just wanted to highlight, if we go into the next slide, is we had a gentleman called Scott who worked with us. He was a cleaner on a part-time contract with us, and he came to us and he identified himself and said, I really want to progress into a career as a scientist, but I left school with no qualifications, etc. We were able to really support him, and I think this quote on here says why we do the things we do and the impact it has. So as you can see there, Scott left school, no qualifications, having the opportunity to work within Labcorp to create a career, change my life, means the world to him. He's so engaged in the business now. His manager, that quote you can see at the bottom there, she sings his praise all the time about him. He does ambassador work for us. He helps other people coming through. He's been really successful. He got highly commended at National Apprenticeship Awards for Yorkshire for Rising Star, and he won the Harrogate Business Excellent Award for Apprentice of the Year. And we took him down to the Princess Royal Awards acceptance, so he went down there, met Princess Anne, and it's the first time we had ever been to London. And he was like, well, you're going to London and you're going to the palace and you're going to meet a member of the royal family. And he was made up by that. And it really shows that he'd spent 46 years essentially just being medicated for having depression. And then through this program, he was identified as actually having a neurodiverse condition, and now we can help support him in the correct way that he needs to. And rather than looking back and saying, "Oh, I kind of wasted a bunch of my life," he's now looking forward and saying, "I'm in an environment where people value me, can really support me, and can really move forward." So that's all I've got to cover today.
Amazing, thank you so much, Rob. Just everything you said, really. The whole kind of, I've had a question directly around the supply chain influence and that, so I'll leave that till the end. But a question you touched on around making sure that, you know, all the touch points that are touching your business, are they also living this, which I thought was great, and just the intersectionality piece, I think, around and how, you know, different life experiences represent in different ways, and how the whole, going back to what Amanda said, many people will never receive a diagnosis, but would still benefit greatly from adjustments that, you know, that can support us all. So I'm going to bring Charmain in now, just on the point of coaching, if I could, Charmain. So I think it feeds in really nicely to everything that Robert just spoke on. But to kick us off, Charmain, could I ask you, what role, from your perspective, can coaching play in kind of creating pathways of success, I guess, for us all, but with an additional benefit to those who are neurodivergent?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. And at City and Guilds, we've got a coaching community that we've had for about sort of 6 or 7 years now, developing our internal capability with coaches to support everyone in the workplace. And one of those things that we found was really, really important is for our coaches to have a real understanding of working with everyone across the organisation, and how can they be inclusive coaches and bring it into their practice. And importantly, how do they need to coach differently when they're working with people that are neurodiverse? So we've sort of rolled out some training for all our coaches, because they work across the entire organisation, to really support people. So that training was sort of based on the pace of the coaching session, the types of questions they ask, how they ask the coaching questions, setting up the coaching environment, the contracting, the flexibility within that as well. And what we found was lots of people were kind of coming forward, as has been said, that perhaps they've only just had a diagnosis, so really late diagnosis in life, really struggling in work with their relationships and working with line managers, communications come up, focus. And also many were just feeling really stressed and burnt out, and, you know, that kind of overwhelm as well, having to mask at work and behave in a particular way that perhaps their line manager would expect them to. So I think all of those themes are coming out for people that we're coaching, and it's really important that all our coaching community can support colleagues in the workplace. And coaching really supports them to be more independent and to advocate for themselves, and that time and space to think about what is it they need, better understanding of themselves. And we really try and adopt a bit of a strengths-based approach to that as well, so that they have a resource to go back to their managers and really openly say, you know, this isn't working for me, this is what would help me, getting their managers to sort of understand. And what we provide is we provide coaching at any time, so employees can access it, particularly when they might be new to a role, or when they're changing jobs, when they're changing teams, when they've got a new line manager, so they can dip in and out of coaching as much as they need it, really. But it really is about that sort of self-advocacy and sort of having that control about their working relationship, and recognising the things that cause stress and overwhelm, and then sort of tools and strategies to help them sort of manage it. So that's what's been really important internally at City and Guilds. And the knock-on effect of that is people that don't disclose a diagnosis, so say it's a manager, if we're adopting different approaches and as a coach asking different questions about what comes up in that scenario, it can kind of help them understand that actually what does it mean to be an inclusive leader or an inclusive colleague to others as well.
Thank you, Charmaine. Just to go back to something that came up before, just I guess around that intersectionality piece, I wondered if you had any thoughts on how can we ensure that kind of experiences and voices of neurodivergent individuals from marginalised groups are also heard and valued and supported?
As a coaching community, what we do is through supervision is there are certain themes that will come out from the coaching as coachees. So how we feed that back into the organisation then to sort of change our process and practice. I know we talked a little bit about training earlier, and then how does that inform the training that our line managers and people might need? And the intersectional piece is really, really important, because if somebody's layered with different levels of inequity, unable to access resources or support, that can really layer on and kind of build that stress bucket where just going to work is just a challenge within itself, aside from the work that you have to do and the job that you have to do as well. So for our coaching community, the training is, you know, that intersectional focus. They're inclusive coaches, and they can apply and adapt the coaching techniques, whoever they're coaching, whether somebody's got a formal diagnosis or not. And I think that's sort of the direction of travel that we're going in with. What does it mean to be an inclusive coach?
Amazing. You kind of answered my next one, Charmaine, which is just around that, you know, why is it important for all of us, not just those with kind of diagnosis. And I think it's been echoed from all of our speakers so far around that the diagnosis is important, but it's not everything. Some people will never receive a diagnosis, and often even without a diagnosis, you know, there are still pathways and adjustments that can be made. Just lastly, Charmaine, before we move on to the Q&A, I wondered if you had any tips or any kind of techniques on how do we actually measure if coaching is working in this space? What are some of the measures that employers can put in place to make sure that it's working, it's not just a nice to-do activity?
Yeah, so one of the things we do in the coaching program is we have what we call a three-way conversation. So when we set up the coaching, there is a conversation initially with the line manager, and we have what we call public goals and private goals. So the public goals are, this is what the individuals come to coaching for, that they've discussed with their line manager. And then there's some private goals that the individual says, these are the things I want to work on for myself. And then we have a three-way conversation midway. So what is the line manager noticing? What are their colleagues noticing? What is the coachee noticing that's shifted and changing? And then at the end of the coaching, the feedback, where we kind of capture from the line manager and the coachee, you know, what's changed? How have they developed? Where do they need to focus now? So that you get that kind of nice build up of what's happening. And what I've seen as a coach as well, a number of coaches I've worked with that have probably, after the coaching process, have come back to me to say, actually, I've been diagnosed. I, sort of recognise something in myself, and I now have a diagnosis. Many of them have moved job roles, so they've got more senior positions and moved into different areas of the team, building up that self-advocacy and confidence as well. So we're sort of tracking that and seeing that within the organisation. Are people progressing? Are they thriving? Are they developing it in their work? And that's just some ways that we try to measure it here at City and Guilds.
Thank you, Charmaine. I'm going to invite all of my panelists back on screen now, because I've had a couple of questions come through. This first one, I think everybody has an equal say and could answer greatly this one, but I'm going to kick off with you, Robert, on this one. We've had a question around kind of creating allies, and how do we create allies and that will continue to foster neurodiversity acceptance and understanding. I wondered, I'm guessing, some of those employee groups you spoke about might feed into this, but just a question around allyship and people making sure that, there's a seat around the table for this. Any thoughts on that, Robert?
Yeah, so the employee resource groups are a really key part in us developing that. And this is where each employee resource group is key to have an executive sponsor. So it's not just a group inside the company, it's somebody who's then executive responsibilities also become making sure that group is successful and supported. And those groups are then open to anybody to join. In our company, we have groups that send out like a combined newsletter every quarter. So it's got a kind of information where people can join. And then for me, when people start apprenticeship programs, they can join those sorts of programs. We then have an ambassadorial program where people can join. And each of these they're kind of like non-mutually exclusive. So you can join one or you can join all of them. And the ambassador program is kind of suitable for people who want to go out and give talks at schools to kind of like or universities to kind of encourage people, or even come and do talks like today, for example. They would come and do things like that. And then we have an alumni section, so people that have been through the process but don't want to join any of those, but they have specific information and knowledge about programs or job roles that individuals are going through. That's really important. And over time, what that's created is more of a culture where people move towards. There's all these different avenues where they can go to, because what we wanted to avoid was kind of like a badge of, here is an ally, you must go speak to this person. What we wanted to do is create more of a culture where anybody could go and speak to most people, or they could signpost most people towards one of these different groups to pick up individual or specific information. So that's where we've kind of moved to at the moment. We're still in that process and journey of moving towards the ideal situation, but we're getting quite far down the road on that now.
Amazing. Any thoughts on that one, Charmain, from you, just around allyship and individuals who may not be neurodivergent themselves? Exactly as Rob said, having the, just the basic level of awareness, I guess, to know where the resources are, or just to know, inclusive practice for anyone.
Yeah, very similar really with the employee resource groups. And we've got two groups that work in slightly different ways. And I think that involving the employee resource groups in our decision making and the design of our practices and processes, so their voices in there, almost using them as our SMEs in a way, so if we're going to change a process, what impact will this have, positively or negatively? So we do try and use the employee resource groups in that way. And I think within the training that we put on is building up that allyship and awareness for managers and others, and almost sort of keeping it in the conversation and being inclusive in our approach. So when we're in meetings, role modeling that all the time is really, really helpful. And so those are the things we're sort of trying to do to change the culture and, to kind of drive that inclusive approach. So if it's online meetings, what do people need beforehand, thinking about how we set the agenda, what we share in advance of that meeting. So that kind of helps to build that allyship.
Amazing. Thank you, Charmain. Any thoughts on that one from you, Amanda, just before we go to the next question, just around allyship and kind of building that sense of belonging, I guess, in an organisation?
Yeah, I think that where you start with senior leadership and you get a message to say this is a good place to have these conversations. And I think, Robert and Charmain's point of the ERGs are a great test bed to say, what are we doing, gain feedback, test it out, which then says to other people, it has that ripple effect that there are different people you can come and signpost to, and having those in different parts of the organisation can make a really big difference. It's because sometimes you don't know who to go to talk to, so you do need to have different points of contact, and it might be your mental health first aiders in some organisations do need to understand about neurodiversity as well. But allyship comes when people feel safe to ask questions in a respectful and curious way. And that's, I think, really important. So, both those models, really great. They're just good examples of how we start those conversations in a safe way, really.
You've just started answering the next question, Amanda, which is great. So I'll stay with you. But around, organisations that are at the start of their journey on inclusion, what key steps to build a culture of psychological safety that encourages neurodivergent individuals to disclose and ask for support and adjustments they need, rather than suffering in silence? So I guess that, what key steps?
Yeah, so start at the top. Senior leadership buy-in says this is important. We're not doing it as a tick box. It's not going to be neurodiversity this year and gender next year, et cetera, that it's starting to be woven into everything that the organisation does, and it becomes business as usual. And I think I can see that from what we're hearing is where that's happening, that has a lasting impact. If we only do it as sort of one-off, then that doesn't really work. So senior leadership, then we need to be having HR feeling confident that they've got the confidence and competence to be able to support people in all parts of the journey, that means they're offering things that that's being talked about, that Robert's saying about, having interviews which are flexible and having different types of application. That's telling people who are applying to this organization, this is a good place. It's all the markers that says this is a safe place for me to share my information. Not having a tick box say, are you dyslexic, but to say, at any point in this journey, if you want help and support, we're here, please contact us, is an important framing, because not everybody who's neurodivergent sees themselves as disabled, but they still might need adjustments, but they won't know what to do unless they know what the process is. So I can't know to ask for help if I don't know what is going to happen. So making all those processes transparent, all of those signs then says to somebody, this is a safe place for me to ask for help. And people may have had poor experiences in other places and be very reticent to do so. So I think it's those flags on your website, on your application forms, having those ERGs where people could go and talk to people within organizations, say, what's it like here, can really make a big difference. Say, yeah, this is a great place for me to come.
I've just remembered the question on the supply chain during Robert's session. So we had a question, Robert, around influence in supply chain, and any tips or kind of best practice that you have adopted around how can you influence supply chain organizations that you work with to also adopt this inclusive model of working?
Yeah, so one of the key powers we have as a employer and purchaser is who we purchase our products from and how we purchase those products. So one of the key things that we changed is we added into our tender process certain point scoring questions, etc., about the support that people offer. We do this alongside other things, such as like we do quite a bit of work on social mobility. So we look at what wages are they paying their apprentices, for example, and we try and encourage people and say, if you act in this manner, then you will get more points, and then it'll go down to more to like what's your quality, what's your price point, that sort of thing. Whereas we can actively rule out some suppliers where we're saying that they're actively not supporting the ethos or culture that we want as a business, because what we want to do is, as a business, be a hub for that best practice to kind of flow out from. So what we have is kind of like in that tender process is our power to kind of choose who to go to. Now, understandably, in some areas that can be quite limited in terms of there might be only one supplier for a certain product, things like that. But then what we do is then we build into our contracts of agreement to purchasing kind of like that kind of exchange of information and exchange of knowledge. In some circumstances, we have placement rotations where they might go to our suppliers and we'll get individuals in. And in those certain instances, for example, we can say, oh, we're going to send somebody to your business. They are non-neurotypical. Do we need to help you with your support? What support can we give you to help them have a good placement? And then what we find from that is that flows into that business unit as well, because they tend to keep those processes in place afterwards. So that's the sort of stuff that we work on with our providers, with our direct power. But the key point is we're buying a service off of them. So if we're not happy with the service they're providing, we have the choice to go somewhere else.
Amazing, thanks, Ruben. I think that whole bit around, everyone is on a journey with this. There is no, a star for everything. But being open and being curious and making those adjustments and testing if they work, speaking to the community, is this working, is great. So thank you. We've had a question around how can organisations tap into neurodiverse individuals to drive innovation, problem solving, and creative thinking within their teams? Which I think is quite a nice one. I'm not sure who to direct it to. But Amanda's come off mute, so I'm going to lead with you, Amanda, if you don't mind on that one. So it's innovation, problem solving, creative thinking at work.
Okay, so I think one of the key things is that we don't box people into neurodivergent people who've got good IT skills or neurodivergent people who have very high creativity. What you're trying to do is maximize the individual's talents of what they've got. And that means in any team, you're going to have a mix of people who communicate differently, think differently, and act differently. And what you want to do is make sure each of those people has got the opportunity to maximize their skills. When we've got skills, talents, strengths all aligning and the barriers reduced, then you'll see that thrive. And in a team, sometimes the challenges are that if we've had sort of cookie cutter hiring, we've hired in the same because we've always thought those people do this job, we then get a group of people who communicate in a similar way, but actually you want a mix of different communication to allow that person to thrive. So I think one of the key things there is to be thinking about in a team different communication styles and preferences, because sometimes that's the clash, that we do it this way, somebody might do it in a linear form, somebody might want to come up with big ideas, and the difference in way we operate can sometimes cause conflict. By sharing that information about the different ways synchronously, either when we're talking to each other, or asynchronously when it might be an email, which can get complete lost in translation. So you can have a long email that says the important stuff at the bottom, and and you never get to the bottom because it's so long. That person then gets lost in what they should do. So this is good team management in a way, is what are the differences in the way we communicate in this sort of format, or in written format, or face to face. Why is it going wrong? How can we understand each other better? Then you'll start to see somebody's got creative skills or IT skills, or their skills will be able to thrive. And I think we've got to be careful that we don't have sort of stereotypical tropes that people who are neurodivergent are all good at IT, or they're or going to come up with they're all people who are neurodivergent are entrepreneurs. That's clearly not the case. We have people who are neurodivergent across all areas of society, in all frames and jobs. And it's the barriers that stop them thriving, and that's our approaches and access that stops people thriving. And then that allows you to train and promote them and allow them to thrive across all workplaces and spaces.
I love that. I think the one thing I've taken from our mini conversation, Amanda, is just that holistic approach of the whole person, which I love so much, and I think echoed that perfectly. So the next one is a great question, I guess, around practical adjustments and practical support. So we've got, do you have any specific adjustments made for remote workers that are neurodivergent? I'm not sure you want to come in on that one. Robert, you've got a few as our employer.
Yeah, I can do that one if you want. So we saw a huge increase in this over the period of the COVID pandemic, both with people that were in the business which were moving towards home working, and those people that we hired coming in. So one of the things we did was kind of some really simple steps. Is we've got a box that's called like Your Home Office, which people can request, and we send it to people, and it has specific things such as like work posters and kind of like things that make it feel more like you're in the office. Because what we were finding was some people were really struggling with that disconnect from the workplace, and we tended to find that people who are neurodivergent sometimes, and it's not the case for all cases, were like they don't feel connected to the work, so they feel less able to concentrate or get their work done, and that was then leading to performance issues and things like that. So little things like having this kind of like work-based office. As you can see from mine's very cluttered and got lots of stuff everywhere, but some people have very clear, like, this is my office and this is how we function. We also make sure that the equipment that people are provided is up to date with their kind of like any disclosed conditions that they have, and that can be anything from making sure that the screens are the right light, that people have the right sort of glasses, etc., all the way through to certain software that people have. And one of the biggest things that we've done, which is really easy, and we really involve our employee resource groups in this, and I go to them quite often just because it's a nice break, is we have virtual coffee mornings on certain days, so that people who are distant from the workplace can, if they want to, attend these coffee mornings, because some people might be very isolated in the social aspect of work, was one of the main reasons that they attended work and got out of work. So we have these virtual coffee mornings where people can just attend, they can just chat through work things that they want to, they can have quizzes at Christmas. I usually go to the quizzes because my raft of general knowledge is quite extreme, but then they can just sit and have a coffee, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, etc. And they're kind of like the low level changes that we make. And then obviously what we've done is made some great policy changes from a business sort of level to make sure that our kind of like our occupational health and support services, where they used to say things like in the office or at the office, we've clarified that by saying this also counts for at work. And we brought in a 24-hour, 7 days a week dial up sort of like helpline where people can get coaching support, they can get counselling, even if your plumbing breaks. But if it's particularly around neurodiversity and neurodivergent people, it allows them another helpline that even in the middle of the night, if they suddenly get stressed because they haven't been able to make that connection at work, they can phone that up. And that was all to make sure that being at home felt as much as possible like you were still part of the greater kind of like work family.
Amazing, thank you, Rob. And we've had a question which is great. I think this will be our last question, but it's around coaching. It's around the support that neurotypical coaches can offer neurodiverse employees that they'll kind of genuinely benefit from. So the question talks about, in this person's experience, managers and coaches are likely to suggest strategies that aim for neurodiverse employees to fit into neurotypical workplaces rather than celebrating their neurodivergence. I wonder if Charmain, you want to kick us off and we can work back around the room for that one.
Just reading through that question, and that's so common and so typical, and we do it all the time, don't we? You know, when we offer people what works for us. Why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And it's almost flipping it on its head. So in the coaching, it's really centering it around the individual. What do you need? What strategies might help you? And in the coaching, depending on the style of coaching, most coaching programs don't cover neurodiversity and inclusive coaching, but what we focus on is there's that kind of directive and non-directive. So some of the coaching we do may be directive. So we might be offering a range of tools, but leaving the choice and responsibility of those tools. Which do you think would work for you? So they're coming up with their own solutions and strategies, not offloading strategies and techniques onto them. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that comes out of coaching internally, where employees will say, my manager wants me to do it in this way, but I find it easier to do it this way. And so we're sort of encouraging them to advocate for themselves. So, you know, there are a range of tools and strategies out there. There's a kit bag, but it's really for the individual to choose what they think will work for them, give it a try, come back. How did that work? Adopt another strategy or tool or technique. But that is probably one of the biggest challenges in the coaching as a coach, that you almost need to flip your thinking on its head, if you like.
Great, thank you, Charmain. Can I bring you in there, Amanda? I guess it's probably a wider issue outside of coaching, but just around employees generally, you know, trying to get everyone into one box that kind of worked for them historically. And any thoughts on that kind of coaching and how we celebrate neurodivergence?
I mean, I think, you know, Charmain's come up with some really, I'd say yes to 100% what you just said, because I think it is test and trial. And I think the important thing is that we have this conversation. Can somebody who's only neurodivergent be the person who supports somebody who's only neurodivergent? And I don't think that's the case. I think that what we can learn from experiences, and I think that test and trial, and to learn to advocate for yourself and to be able to share that. It's, you know, coaching is not always directive. It's that non-directive piece which is really important. And I think for some people who are neurodivergent, not knowing how to advocate for themselves and ask for what they need and having that opportunity to discuss that can be massively useful, I think, you know, across the employment piece. So I think we shouldn't forget that. And that's where I think coaching has a major impact. It allows a safe place to have some of those conversations, to learn to rehearse some of that and to work out what I do need. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing that's going on there.
Thank you, Amanda. Any last thoughts on that one, Rob, before I wrap up? Just around the coaching and around, you know, celebrating neurodivergence and not putting people into this box of wanting them to suit the way that we've always done things.
No, and I think this is a key element of our, like, it's my career, our story, is it's all about the storytelling. So it's often when we talk about things like neurodiversity and like other forms of barriers to it, we're always talking about how we can overcome these barriers. And it's really important to celebrate the successes that individuals have had. So therefore we can make, like, for example, our element of Scott there. Scott is a shining light in the fact of how he has, as an individual, has been able to benefit, but then actually celebrate his individuality. And it's about storytelling. So taking time in the company to make sure that you post that on your internal sites, have that on your kind of LinkedIn's, if you have them, your social media, to make sure that it's not always the downside or the extra work that managers see, but actually look at this individual, look how this, and actually what we find is I now get approached by individuals in the company saying, oh, could my story be featured, or could I be that? And we're like, yep, of course you can. And I've got a plethora of them now. So I think it's really great from that side of things to kind of really push through that bit, because when that allows coaches to then do is see those stories and talk about those stories in terms of their materials, that they tend to talk to an individual about how do you replicate that sort of behavior into people.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, my amazing panelists. I think I may actually run just to time, which is Great. So yeah, thank you to my amazing Professor Amanda Kirby, Charmain Bucho and Robert. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for everybody on the call who took an hour out of their Friday to join us. We will be circulating slides in the recording. There was a question in the chat which we didn't get to around data or metrics, so we will get to that question and we'll get that circulated in the kind of post email you will get. But yeah, once again, thank you for joining us, everybody. We hope you found the session insightful. We will be sending out further comms around this, and we'll get a copy of the Neurodiversity Index around to everybody in that email too, if you haven't had a chance to have a look over. But that's all from me. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for joining us again.